Hello and welcome to the last session, the 30 minutes reflections and closing remarks after these almost 1.5 days. My name is Thomas Scheibeler. I'm the co-founder of the Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable, the organization which has partnered with CECP, CEO Investor Forum, to organize this event. I have the pleasure to have two distinguished panelists with me. Laura Amadi, who is a former ESG analyst from Calvert Research and Management, and an ingoing candidate for MBA at Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, and Susanne Stormer, who is a board member of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. She's currently also a partner with PwC in Denmark, leading their sustainability practice, and many of you may know her from her 12 years of being the VP for sustainability at Novo Nordisk between 2008 and 2020. So let's kick that conversation off, and it should really be a conversation, I hope. And let me start by kind of reflecting on the fact that we have had 9 biopharma CEOs presenting their long-term plans, including ESG. And I take this as an indication of the fact that businesses move from having sustainability strategies into having sustainable business strategies. This may sound picky, but I do believe it's a big step. Would you share this perception? Maybe Laura, you can go first, from an investor or analyst perspective.
Yes, absolutely. I think, one of the most striking observations that I made throughout the presentations was, a lot of the CEOs are saying ESG is really nothing new to our company. Maybe it hasn't always been called ESG, but those principles have long been, expressed in the core business. And I think maybe one of the main shifts that we're now seeing is, companies are no longer saying, we're successful and we treat our people well. We're successful and we have built trust with society. Now the conversation is much more, we're successful because we treat our employees with respect and because we've built trust with society. So I think that's kind of, as you said, it's a little bit of, in the details, but I think that's, it was notable that they're really connecting ESG to the core value drivers of the business. So that was my main takeaway. And I also note that, the CEOs are showing great adaptability in how they're identifying the key ESG issues for their business. So, maybe a couple of years ago, we would still think of climate, environmental sustainability, and diversity as important topics, but now they've really become so front and center. And it's great to see that it looks like businesses are really following the evidence. So, we've got all of this great research out there about how diversity and inclusion are not just the right thing to do, but they're actually critical to business performance. And it was also great to see CEOs connect their environmental stewardship programs to talent recruitment and retention. Those are things that company or employees like to see. So it's great to see that they're able to kind of be agile in the way they approach ESG.
So this sounds like a paradigm shift in a way, that of course you have still some responsibilities if you are a business, but it sounds like ESG is now being looked at or considered more as a source of performance rather than, yes, we have to do this as well. Now, Susanne, I mean, with your track record as an executive in the industry itself, have you perceived that also in interaction with investors, or how has that developed, in your corporate role over the last 5 to 10 years?
Yes, and I can only concur with Laura's points. I sometimes smile when I meet people who say, I'm all for sustainability, because then you should reflect, well, what's the alternative, right? And it was interesting because when I left Novo Nordisk, I had the opportunity to look back at what I had done over the years. And I came across some presentations that I made in 2002, where we had our very first ESG investor engagements. And they were, we were insisting that we wanted to meet with investors to talk about how we were improving our business with, for instance, environmental management, how our work with access to medicines and affordability was important for us. And it was a hard sell at the time. With the investors, some, the niche ESG investors were welcoming it, but I also recall many conversations where we had a tough job. And then fast forward to where we are today, where also in my current role, you don't see many business transactions being made without ESG due diligence having been part of that. So that's about the how do you ensure that ESG dimensions should not be discounting the value of the company, but what is as encouraging is, and this is consistent with Laura's points, is to identify the opportunities for value creation for the enterprise that may be sitting right there and may be underutilized and undercommunicated.
Well, I think the topic between the lines is, if you want to do an analysis and identify drivers of performance, or if you do a due diligence in a transaction, you need information to kind of come to an assessment and a conclusion. I'm not even saying trying to quantify the effect of it or the consequences. But now Laura, from an investor perspective, if you do an ESG analysis or combine it with a financial or overall analysis, what kind of information are you really looking for, or what are you expecting from a company to kind of disclose?
Yes, and I think one of the key points that Susanna just made is about really connecting the ESG information to the business opportunities, the business risks. So I think that's a good place to start with ESG information, is when you're thinking about the topics to disclose on, how are you conducting a materiality analysis? How are you connecting those to the business strategy, value creation? So that's the first thing that we look for. And, it's very clear that a lot of companies are conducting that materiality analysis with internal stakeholders as well as, a variety of external. And then what we really look for is, once those topics are identified, what are the goals? So it's great that you have an agenda with regards to access to medicines, but can you distill it further into, specific subcomponents that you can then act upon? And along the lines of goals comes the topic of metrics. So how are you communicating to investors that you are achieving those goals? So there's got to be some aspect that's measurable and reportable. So perhaps sticking with the access to medicines example, is it a measurement of patients reached? Are you doing sort of outcomes analysis to show, impact on disease burden, which is, even better? And then, along with goals comes an accountability mechanism. So is there a governance structure in place, overseeing the execution of these goals? And what incentives are in place? Is ESG incorporated perhaps into compensation metrics, or what happens if the goals are not achieved? And I think that's something companies are still evolving on. How do we hold ourselves accountable for achieving those things? And I should also mention that the BSRTs communications initiative, which brought together both companies and investors to talk about, this very topic, I think did a great job of bringing together all of those, elements that I've been discussing, and putting it together in a guide that both companies and investors can refer to in order to help kind of bridge the communication divide on ESG information.
Okay, that sounds like not very different from when you do kind of a pure play financial analysis, because what you are looking for is objectives, a strategy to get there, and then you kind of look at the people who are supposed to execute on that strategy, and then you decide, do I believe that they will be, you know, successfully do this? Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good parallel to draw. We might get to this topic further in our conversation, but you know, the issue of materiality always comes up, which you know, kind of differentiates the financial information from the non-financial information. And of course, we don't have the same types of standards for ESG reporting, which I know we might also get to later in the conversation. So I think those are main challenges, but I agree with you very much that the analyses, the thought process are very much the same.
Or I like to talk about materiality a bit more in detail as you bring it up. I'm surprised that you are US based and bringing this materiality discussion up, because we do know that this has a legal meaning in a US environment, and that's why a lot of companies don't use that term. And you made a reference to the guidance that we published, where we consciously avoided the term materiality, but we're only talking about priority ESG issues, just to not step on someone's toes and to create legal implications with that. So we also know that materiality is on the mind of the regulator, very much so in Europe. Now, if you, from an investor perspective, look at materiality, and then, you know, I let Susanne react from her roles, which I will explain in a minute. Is it mainly focused on this outside in, related to value creation? What does ESG do to the investee, or also the other way around?
Yeah, I guess that's a very good question. You know, I agree. You know, the topic of materiality, it's very difficult to discuss, and I think, you know, it definitely goes both ways. And I think one way that I have been thinking about materiality, which I thought might bring, you know, a little bit of a different aspect to the discussion, is, as we've been talking throughout the forum over the past couple of days, with this sort of long-term view, which, you know, maybe we don't typically see when we think about, you know, the legal definition of materiality from, you know, a financial reporting perspective. But, you know, things that quarter to quarter, even in a year, you might consider, you know, oh, you know, this is what my diversity looks like this quarter. This is what it looks like next quarter. Same with, you know, human capital management metrics. If you're in the biopharma industry and you're trying to build this, you know, world-class talent organization in order to innovate for the next 10 years, you might think, okay, well, you know, in that regard, those quarter to quarter changes in your human capital metrics, they actually start to look a lot more quote unquote material or priority. And so I think that's kind of how I view materiality, is, you know, just because something's, you know, the measurability of the asset is not necessarily as clear as a more tangible asset. It's really getting at, in the long run, you know, human capital, natural capital, trust with society. These are all very valuable assets in you know, over the course of a decade or so, which is not all that long of a period of time in this industry. You know, what are the metrics we need to look at in the short term to ensure that we're accomplishing those long-term goals towards value creation?
Susanne, I think we need to bring some clarity into that alphabet or terminology jungle of materiality, financial materiality, double materiality, dynamic materiality, what have you. And I wanted to maybe give you the microphone, Susanne, to relate that also to the developments that we can see in the standards world, because the question of materiality is also at the core of these standard setting organizations. And that we should give full transparency here that you are also on the standards board of SASB, and you have been or still are a member of the EFRAG, which is the body that kind of advises the EU regulator in how to flesh out the forthcoming corporate sustainability reporting directive. So Susanne, maybe you take a minute to give all those who believe now they are kind of in the detail of the technicalities to orient. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And I was smiling when we were talking about terminology because, like you say, there is a clear, divide going through the Atlantic in terminology. So I think for that purpose, what we did in the project task force that was set down by EFRAG to develop recommendations for what could European standards look like. We actually spent a lot of time on discussing materiality, and I think it was well spent because it does raise a lot of questions, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But worthwhile saying is that in the European directive, there has always been that double materiality perspective, that companies should look at the impact, and I would like to use the word impact, the impact to the business. So for instance, of climate change implications for the business, as well as the impact of the business. But it's also fair to say that over the years, a lot of the focus in, for instance, corporate reporting has been about the impact of the business on people, communities, and the environment, for good reason, because it always goes back to how can they demonstrate that they are responsible businesses. So that's about the externalities. So I think by clarifying that there is this outside in and inside out impact, and that's what we're looking at here when we talk about ESG, is we are looking at the value, the enterprise value creation or erosion. And therefore we also indicate that indeed there's no fixed boundary, that impacts of the business can translate into impacts to the business at a certain point. If you take diversity and inclusion, then inability to create a diverse workforce could actually lead to inability to attract the right talent, for example. So I think that clarification has been well placed. And then just to round off, while we are on this topic, I was also very happy to see that in the proposed directive from the European Commission, which is very much aligned with the recommendations we gave. The title now is Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So I cherish the fact that the term non-financial is dead, because it was never a useful term.
Thank you, Susanne, for that clarification. And maybe if I may add to the folks that sit outside the US, if we talk about this directive, then we do that because it's not stopping at the EU borders. I always compare it with the chemical regulation called REACH, which we have seen, I don't know, a decade ago, and that has implications all across the globe for everyone who wants to do business with the European economic space. So this would be similar both for financial services companies and real economy companies, just to make that clear. So we're not talking a European issue here only. When we were starting with the discussion with, it needs information. And I think we can all agree that information or the communication between an issuer, a company, and its audience, shareholders and other stakeholders, should be efficient, effective, and decision useful. I think that's, I guess we could agree on this one. And now we see a lot of, or a diversity in the standards world these days. And standards should play towards efficiency of communicating, right? How would you see this developing over the next couple of years? Will we see a lot of harmonization? Will we see continued diversity of standards? We have SASB, we have the EU or EFRAG, and we have now also IFRS Foundation, stepping on stage, and they will announce a standards board somewhere at COP26 in Scotland. Hopefully that's the plan. So how do you see this move forward? Is there any chance to have some kind of harmonization in the future? Maybe Susanne, you and then Laura.
Well, given my current roles, the predictable answer is yes, there will be harmonization, and I think for good reason. So so certainly, like you say, there will be harmonization around how do you articulate this notion of enterprise value creation or erosion, which is what SASB and the IRC, now the Value Foundation, will be joining forces around. There will still be a need to strengthen the reporting around the impact of the business, where we have a number of also standards. We have the GRI, we have the UN guiding principles as, I would say, a very strong foundation, even if it's not necessarily with metrics. So I think there will be a convergence of these, and like you say, the fact that some of this is happening on European soil, then it will affect companies doing business in Europe. So like we saw with legislation coming out of the UK at some point with Modern Slavery Act, that spread to others. So it has to be global, and yet with room for particular jurisdiction or even sector specific, and you can make it also company specific flavors in your reporting.
Laura, any perspective on the development of standards from an investor perspective? Of course, the hope would be to have a one size fits all, but I don't think we will get there in the foreseeable future, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's very encouraging what Susanne says about, the hopes for global harmonization. I think, in talking with companies over the past couple of years, that's always been a challenge, because they feel that they've got, some very unique perspective about their own business that they'd like to communicate, with freedom from a very prescriptive standard. And, that viewpoint I appreciate as well. And so I guess just from the investor standpoint, I also think it is a two-way street. So, even with the information that we have now, I think investors are becoming much more sophisticated at digesting, what is provided in company sustainability reports, although not, completely uniform across companies. And, we're becoming, more sophisticated in being able to kind of meet companies part of the way there, and continued dialogue, between companies and investors is only facilitating that process further.
And I think if I may add to that, because Thomas, you mentioned these very important dimensions of efficient, effective, and decision useful. And as a certainly a former report preparer, what I've always emphasized is you need to be clear on who you report to. And here, evidently, the investors are certainly in the eyes of SASB and formerly the IRC, also the primary intended audience. It's not that investors have primacy as such, but the primary intended audience for an annual report. And then regarding the decision usefulness, if there is to be any value in spending hours and resources in putting together reports, it also has to be decision useful for the management, so that by providing this information, you are able to provide a better steer of your business. So it really also emphasizes the fact that sustainability reporting is much more forward-looking than conventional financial reporting. So it holds a lot more information to those analysts who know how to read the numbers.
I'm glad you made that point of kind of creating internally the value also in kind of having this information at hand to do better decision making, because that is largely underestimated. And if that's not the case, then the risk is that these exercises will just be a box-ticking compliance exercise that companies do, with the least effort possible, and that's typically not a good communication then. So I'm mindful of the time. You mentioned sector specific, and if I heard you correctly, you both said, these ESG and the reporting, the communication has a sector specific aspect. Now, if I turn that around, what's the role that the sector can play as all these regulations and standardizations are in the making? Shouldn't the sector step up and be part of that discussion? Yeah, Susanne, perhaps first.
Yes, it definitely should. And I can say that as a representative of the sector, we were at Novo Nordisk, we were part of the discussion when the very first sector-specific standard was developed by SASB. That was healthcare, in fact. I don't think I reveal any major secrets by saying that the current sector standard for healthcare could do with an update to make it more global and also more current. And the only thing I can say is to encourage the sector to engage in dialogue, because that is the due process that SASB has put in place. And to make that sector-specific standard, to make it relevant for companies regardless of their jurisdictional headquarter.
Thank you. Laura, last comment from your end?
Yes, I would just completely agree. And I think just from participating in the BSRT, it was clear that the companies had so much to add to the discussion that investors were probably not thinking about on their own. And so I agree that the industry should be involved.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we have to come to a close because time is up. So thank you very much, Laura. Thank you very much, Susanne, for joining me on this panel. It was a pleasure, like always. It's now time we come to an end of our first ever Biopharma CEO Investor Forum. So it's time to say goodbye, but it's first time to say thank you to the attendees, the speakers, the panelists, all the contributors behind the scenes, and to the attendees. Please keep an eye on your inbox and on CECP social media channels, as we will share key takeaways shortly, and resources from the Biopharma CEO Investor Forum, this event, will also be posted on the event platform as well as the CEO Investor Forum website. We would also like to hear from you about your experience at this event and your reflections on each presentation. Please take a minute to share your feedback through the surveys in the polling section of the event platform, if you have not done so already. And finally, let me thank our sponsors, Calvert, Cohen, and Deloitte, but also our media partners, 3BL Media, Edelman, and Red Havas. With that, it has been a wonderful journey with our CECP colleagues, and I'm saying that on behalf of the whole Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable team, to kind of lead up to this event, run this event. I hope you find it interesting. I hope it has given you a lot of food for thought, some takeaway messages to bring into your daily professional life. With that, I'd like to close and say goodbye and stay safe and well. Thank you.
Sustainability, or a concern for the broad environmental and social impacts of businesses and how they're governed, is gaining more and more attention from investors, regulators, and the public. The Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable has been designed as a platform to connect and inform biopharma executives as they move their sustainability agendas forward.
Each meeting really feels like a masterclass, and this engagement really expedited my ability not just to come up to speed in my new role, but to deliver impact to my company, Bristol Myers Squibb.
We got involved with the Sustainability Roundtable because it's one of the leading industry level coalitions working on sustainability integration in the industry.
We've actually managed to come together as a sector and provide some guidance on and consensus around what we see are the most material issues from a sector perspective. And I think that that's really unique and quite powerful and extraordinary actually from a sector perspective. So that has been extremely valuable and something that I believe is really unique.
Having a group that is focused on sustainability, specifically in our industry, provides an unmatched resource to learn from each other about what the others are doing and the challenges that they are also facing. And it has added to my network very knowledgeable professionals and the possibility to find solutions together.
So what makes us different? I think there are 2 points to be mentioned here. First, we have a double focus, both on the sector and on the topic of ESG and sustainability. And second, we have been able to create a level of trust that allows for open and frank discussions with no hidden agendas. So we invite you to participate.